Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another installation of Coming Clean with the Dirty Dozen, where we put the finest explorers twice a week straight into your living room. My name is Aron Arngrimsson, and I'm going to be your host tonight. And before we start the broadcast, I just want to introduce the crew that's behind the scenes in this wonderful community project. So, guys, do you want to take the drapers off? Hey, how's it going? How's everyone? How are you, Jeff? How's it going?
Yeah, very busy.
Yeah, you're making me very stressed. You're like, it's every time 20 minutes before broadcast, I just get all caps, yalla, yalla, yalla on my phone.
This is professional television. We work to a schedule.
It's because you are on a schedule too, I bet.
Yeah.
All right, nice to see you, brother. And Victoria, how's it going over there?
All good, thank you. Can hear the NHS getting clapped for. All good.
Excellent. So Jeff is obviously our operator. He's running the show from Chepstow. And then we have Victoria, who's our producer. And she's, during the broadcast, going to be taking your questions from Facebook Live and asking them to Mark Powell and I. So a nice one, guys. Thanks for showing up. So anyway, I just want to, for those of you, this is our third broadcast. So some of you might not know what's the Dirty Dozen? Why are you doing this? The Dirty Dozen Expeditions is an expedition company. We usually find ourselves in Truck Lagoon, Bikini, Galapagos, Myanmar, Chernobyl. We love the outdoors. We love extreme adventures. But in the light of COVID-19, we find ourselves obviously indoors a lot more, as we should be. But at the same time, we want to connect with our diving community, you guys, and just reach out and try and have a good time inside, right? So without any further ado, our guest tonight is none other than the man himself, Mark Powell. So I'll read a bit of a bio before he comes on. So Mark, he had his first experience of diving at the tender age of 10 when he did a try dive in a local pool, and he's never looked back. Seemingly heading straight from the try-dive pool to the coast, Mark Powell discovered his true passion was exploring wrecks. So much so, in spite of having traveled the farthest flung corners of the world, he is most at home around the UK waters, where there are some of the best wreck diving in the world. Mark became an instructor in 1994 and has been actively instructing since. And in 2002, he set up the company DiveTech. Mark is a TDI instructor trainer evaluator and a member of TDI's Global Training Advisory Panel. An active contributor to the Dive Press and a regular speaker on diving conferences and events, you can find him sharing his knowledge with an excited and engaged audiences all around the world, like tonight. In 2008, Mark published his iconic book, which many of you have in your bookshelf right now, Deco for Divers. In 2010, Deco for Divers was awarded Publication of the Conference at the Eurotech 2010 Technical Diving Conference. In 2014, it won the Media Award at Tech Dive USA. And not as late as last year, he released another book called Technical Diving, An Introduction. But Deco for Divers is now widely regarded as an acclaimed overview of the theory and physiology of decompression. To summarize, Mark Powell is an industry juggernaut, a true wreck junkie, and an original Dirty Dozen. So, without any further ado, let's bring Mark into the stage. How are you doing, brother?
I'm great, thanks, Aron. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you again. I think you're just 10 minutes from Jeff, our operator down the road in Chepstow, aren't you?
Yeah. It's Chepstow is the center of the diving world.
That's right. So how are you? How is lockdown in the United Kingdom?
Yeah, it's pretty tough here. We're under pretty much total lockdown. Nothing but essential travel. Everybody's working from home, which is tough when you're a diving instructor. Only an hour for exercise. So yeah, it's difficult conditions at the moment, but trying to keep on the bright side of things.
Yeah, and make the best out of it. I mean, talking about your work, how is work? And tell us a little bit about TDI and how your teachings and operations have evolved during this COVID-19 indoor landscape.
So yeah, I mean, I was supposed to be completely booked out last month and this month with courses, and of course, for those not in the UK, we've got absolutely fantastic weather at the moment, so it would have been a great time. And of course, yeah, we can't do any of that. But with the work that I also do for TDI SDI HQ, there's loads of stuff going on. I think we've launched 2 or 3 major projects just today. So
Yeah, I saw something
yeah,
about that.
I'm actually working. Yeah, big initiative we launched today to try and bring the industry together, try and inject a little bit of hope and a bit of positivity into the industry. It's a bad time for everyone, so you know, the idea is let's work together to publicize diving as a whole.
Exactly. We're all in this together.
Yeah.
And you're an author, Mark. Obviously, you wrote the iconic book Deco for Divers, and most recently Technical Diving and Introduction. What originally sparked your interest in decompression?
So originally, the whole path started off when I started getting into technical diving, and wanted to find out a little bit more about decompression. And basically, this was the book that I wanted to go out and buy, and it just didn't exist. So I had to do all the research myself, and it was hard work. I mean, I remember going to you know, a university library in London to get a copy of Haldane's original paper and things like that. And then when I became an instructor myself, students wanted notes, they wanted more information. So it really started off as the notes from my course. And then the students would ask me, you know, is there a book that goes into a little bit more detail on this? And when you've been asked that 50 times, you think, well, maybe there's an opportunity here. So, you know, I wrote it for my students as much as anything, and you know, never expected it to be as popular as it's become.
Yeah, I remember getting this book myself in 2012 or something, and it was a staple in the dive center ever since. I can't remember how many times I read it, but it seems like an obvious question to most. But why do you think it's relevant to write this book to what you do now as an instructor, trainer, evaluator, and so
on? Well, I think whether you're talking about dive masters, or recreational instructors, or technical divers, we need to understand what's going on in our body. We need to understand a little bit about the theory of decompression. And it always struck me as unusual that there was very little explanation aimed at the normal diver, the average diver. You know, if you went and looked at the scientific papers, they're written as scientific papers have to be, scientific jargon, lots of figures, and you know, if you're a mathematician or a doctor, they probably make perfect sense. But the average diver is not going to want to wade through all that information. So,
exactly,
as an instructor, our job is to take complicated information and present it in a way that makes sense to our students. So that's what I was trying to do, to give divers the information that they needed, without all of the maths, without all of the complications, just the critical information. Because I think, as I said, you know, whether you're a dive master, instructor, whether you're a technical diver, you need to know what's going on inside the body in order to make decisions about how you approach your decompression.
And obviously that's our topic tonight, your latest thoughts on decompression. But before we get too far into that, tell us a little bit more about your role in SDI and TDI beyond being an evaluator and so on. I remember you telling me at dive shows that when TDI originally hired you, they just said, be yourself. But what is entitled in being yourself?
So yeah, as well as being an instructor and an instructor trainer for my own business, I work part-time directly for HQ. So 2 days a week, I work directly for HQ. And I work in the international business group. So we support the instructors and the regional offices worldwide. So my job is to represent the international view back to HQ, and to represent HQ to the rest of the world. So I get involved in marketing projects. I get involved in giving feedback on training topics, and the way the industry is going. But the main focus is just giving what support is needed to the regional offices, instructors, instructor trainers, all around the world.
So TDI and SDI have always embraced controversial topics. So if it is solo diving, if using dive computers, what are your thoughts on teaching open water while neutrally buoyant, open water and CCR? What are your thoughts?
So yeah, teaching open water while nutrient buoyant is such a hot topic at the moment. We've got a Facebook Live program on the TDI SDI website Facebook page, I think on the 12th of next month, talking about this specifically. And it generates a lot of discussion, but I'm not entirely sure why that is. Our view is that we want to teach people to dive. That's what diving agencies should be doing. So rather than teaching a list of skills, we should be teaching people to dive. And if you can't maintain your buoyancy, you can't dive. Being neutrally buoyant is one of the most attractive bits about being a diver. Absolutely. So we have to teach open water divers to be able to maintain their buoyancy. And of course, then if something goes wrong, they've got to be able to deal with that problem while they're maintaining their buoyancy. So, it's a lot of people say this is a new idea, but it's not. It goes right the way back to 40, 50 years ago with the very first diver training. We taught people to be divers. It's really only in the last couple of years that this idea of bang through the skills, tick list, and then move on has come in. So yeah, we fully support teaching open water students to be able to do all these skills neutrally buoyant. Our dive masters, instructors, instructor trainers are expected to be able to demonstrate all of these skills neutrally buoyant. And that's the way the industry is going. A lot of the best, the up and coming instructors, that's the way they want to teach. And so, as an agency, we've got to take that into account. We should be training people to match the way that best practice is developing in the industry, rather than trying to force people to train a certain way, because that's the way that we've done it for the last 10 years or so.
No, I couldn't agree more.
So we take a similar approach. We take a similar approach when it comes to open water on a rebreather. It's a topic that's generated a lot of interest, but we're not seeing people really doing that. We're not seeing students wanting to do that. We're not seeing instructors. So at the moment, we're not as an option on our open water course, but you never know. If the industry moves in the future, we will move with it.
Excellent. So we had a bit of an introduction on how you're doing, about TDI, about SDI, but enough chit chat. It's time for you, Mark Powell, to come clean with the dirty dozen. Let's start with an easy question that doesn't take any time to explain, right? And let's keep in mind we only have like 40 minutes on the go here. What is decompression theory, Mark?
There's two answers to that. There's a simple answer and there's a slightly more complicated answer. The simple answer is go down, swim around, and then don't come up too quickly. That's the easy approach. And the complicated approach basically just goes into a little bit more detail about what too means in too quickly. What does not too quickly actually mean? So decompression theory really is looking at a combination of what actually happens in the body compared with some theories and some practical algorithms that seem to make it possible to do decompression dives without getting bent. So that's the intermediate answer. The really long answer takes about 3 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of caught you off guard there. So, guys, remember before we carry on that you can actually ask Mark Powell questions live. And, in 10-20 minutes, we'll bring Victoria on and she'll ask some of the questions you've been asking in the feed. But, Mark, going back to you, getting the nickname Mr. Deco, which I don't know if you like very much, in a world dominated by expert decompression theorists, that's a strong move. How did your extensive interest in decompression theory come about originally?
So, as we were talking about earlier, it came about as, from a student's point of view, I wanted to learn this and I wanted to teach this. So, I'm not a big fan of that name. In fact, I think you're the only one that called me that.
Still want to bring it up.
But and I make the point in the book, nothing in that book, nothing in Deco for divers is my idea. There's nothing in there that is unique that I've come up with. There's no research in there that was done by me. All I did was to take the existing research that was done by the real greats of decompression research and try and distill it into a way that's understandable. So yeah, as I said, I made the point in the book, and I've not been involved in any of the Deco research that went into the book. I have started to get a little bit more involved in research since then, but that's only very recently.
And that's where I wanted to go with this. So tell us a little bit more, because we had the rehearsal yesterday and there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. What research were you doing with Dan recently?
Yeah, you can see the picture on the screen. This was taken while we were doing some of the research at the National Diving Activity Centre in Chepstow. And it really all came about from a discussion I was having with Laura Moroney from Dan about a lot of the current controversies about decompression and deep stops and which gradient factors we should be using. And a lot of the problems is that many of the studies that have been done don't really reflect exactly the sort of diving that we do as technical divers.
Mm-hmm.
So I was saying to Laura, why don't we just do a study on the actual sort of profiles that people are doing? And she said, that's a great idea, but it's not that easy. We need to get a load of divers who are prepared to do these dives. So I said, well, I think I can get some divers who'd be interested in getting involved in that. She said, well, yeah, we need a location where we can do multiple dives over a number of days in fairly controlled conditions. I thought, well, okay, the National Diving and Activity Centre in Chepstow gives us that sort of
your backyard, basically,
controlled environment. And it's 15 minutes from my backyard. I think it's even closer to Jeff, though. So we worked together. Dan flew over a whole team of researchers. Chantal from the Diver Medic came along and helped out with the research and a lot of the coordination. And a great bunch of UK divers gave up their time, gave up their dives in order to do these test dives. So it was a really successful event. I think the divers really enjoyed being involved in this research. They're interested to see what goes on behind the scenes of a research project. Yeah, hopefully we took a step towards answering a little bit of the question about what is the best approach to deco theory.
And without giving away things you can't, can you tell us a little bit about the results that came out of that study?
So the overall idea was, you've got these different views on gradient factors and related to deep stops. If you go back to the before 2000, we were primarily using Bullman decompression, which was based on very similar to the work done by Haldane in 1908. So deco theory hadn't really moved on a lot in 100 years. And then early 2000s, this idea of deep stops came in. By stopping a little bit deeper, you could allow the bubbles time to shrink before you came up, and so end up with less overall bubbles, which was a novel idea. It was a
Very popular.
different approach. Exactly, and certainly amongst the technical diving community between mid 2000 up until about 2013, 2014, deep stops were taken as like the silver bullet of decompression.
V-planar was the thing.
Exactly, yeah. And V-planar and the various approaches to bubble models, it was flavor of the month. And the technical diving community and myself and many other instructors were really pushing deep stops, and it was trickling out into the recreational diving world as well. But then in about 2011, initially the US Navy came up with a study that says, well, hang on, let's take another look at this. Maybe it's not as good as we initially thought. A couple of other studies that came out before and after that seemed to point in a similar direction. And so very quickly people moved away from deep stops, and even to the point where there was comments that deep stops don't work. The U.S. Navy has proved that deep stops don't work, which is not exactly what they said. So I think really the conclusion that most people have got is that, well, maybe we're stopping a little bit too deep. Some level of deep stop is probably still a good thing, but not too deep. And so the question then is, what is too deep? So the research that we did with Dan was to look at two different profiles, two very realistic profiles. They're typical profiles that people have been diving, very regularly over the last couple of years, and just compare the two profiles. Look at what difference those two profiles at different ends of the deep stop argument, what results they actually gave. It's a small study, so only very initial results, but yeah, I think we came up with some pretty interesting. I'd hesitate to even use the word results, but some pretty interesting indications of where we can go in order to do a little bit more research.
Is there a specific place on the internet where people can download initial impressions, results, and the rest of it?
So not at the moment. Dan are putting the final results together, but we've got a little bit of a sneak preview here. And I know you're not really going to be able to read much of that. But basically, we measured a whole range of things: hematocrit, hemoglobin, urine, and bubble grades. And you can see, looking at those graphs, just eyeballing them, you can see actually not a big difference. They're all pretty consistent. That bottom right-hand graph is the key one. Bubble grades between the two gradient factor models, and we used 2085 and 5075. And you can see the conclusions. There aren't any significant differences. If you take the average between those two, there's no big differences, which doesn't sound like a particularly useful conclusion. But like everything, the devil is in the details. So on average, there was no difference between the two profiles, but the bubble grade over time was quite different. So what we found, which you can see on this this next slide, is on the left-hand side, the gradient factor 2085. So that's a sort of a fairly old school deep stop. So that's a sort of 2005 to 2012 type era deep stop. So the 20 means quite a deep initial stop, and then 85 is more than bull, fairly aggressive. And then what you can see is that there was a recording every 15 minutes. So you can see that the numbers start off fairly low and then tail off quite slowly. Okay. Now, if you compare that to the graph on the right-hand side, 50, 75. So here we've got a a much shallower deep stop. It's still a deep stop, but a shallower deep stop. And then the 75 means that we're padding out the shallow stops. And the reason for that is that the overall decompression time was exactly the same for both of these profiles. The only difference was where that decompression was spent. It was weighted towards the deep stops on the first profile, and more towards the shallow stops in the second profile. And you can see there that on average, if you average those columns, they all come out about the same, but the pattern's very different. The 5085 actually started off with more bubbles to begin with, but they dropped off much quicker. So there's a clear difference between those two gradient factors. So when you hit the surface, it looks like the 2085 is actually better. You've got less bubbles. But an hour afterwards, and an hour and a half, 2 hours afterwards, it's the 5075 model that's actually giving better results. So, as I said, results is probably too much of a phrase to use, but I think it gives us an indication that there are differences between these two gradient factor profiles, and there's a lot more research that we need to do in order to dig into exactly what these mean and how can we optimize it. And also, what if we tried 5085 or 2075? Is it the deep stop or is it the shallow stop that is the most critical? So lots of scope to play around in the future with additional research.
And it's something we were discussing yesterday. I mean, it took for you to go and talk to Laura from Dan, and the divers that were involved in the research had to pay for their own gas. There is not so much funding for these things at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it costs money to do this research, and Dan are fantastic, but they don't have an unlimited budget.
Absolutely, yeah.
So they flew over, they brought the team over, but the divers were contributing as well.
Exactly.
The divers paid
Fantastic.
their own entrance fee. Actually, NDAC did give did a discount for everyone involved in the project, but also the divers were paying for their own gases as well. And this was a trimix dive, so they're paying for their own trimix for this dive, and that's one of the frustrations, I guess. There's very few people very few companies interested in decompression research. The US Navy really isn't doing a huge amount, or any of the navies. Oil companies are not doing a lot of research now. They do saturation divers or an ROV. So the only people interested in this sort of research really is us, the technical diving community. That's one of the reasons why one of the difficulties in doing this sort of research is getting the funding for it. So huge thank you to those divers that got involved and gave up their own time and money to help push forward decompression research.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys, for doing that. So I just want to bring in Victoria for a second there. There's plenty of questions in the stream. Victoria, have you got a few questions you wanna ask Mark?
Hi. Yeah, we've got lots of activity on the social media. Lots of people saying that their copies of Deco for Divers have gone missing, Mark. So you might have a few more sales in the pipe. So let's start with Thomas. Thomas asks, what's the best way to start training dives with Deco?
The best way to start training for Deco is with recreational dives. I always say, there's an SDI flag up behind me at the moment, because whether it's as a diver or as an instructor, recreational dives are where you learn all of the basics. So, safety stops are the training ground for decompression. Safety stops, it doesn't matter if you're bouncing up and down a couple of meters, because it is just a safety stop, and it's better than coming directly to the surface. But that's when you can start to practice. So practice holding the safety stop to within a meter of the target depth, and then half a meter, and then 30 centimeters, and then try and keep as still as you can. And then while you're doing your safety stop, do something else to sort of gradually build up your ability to maintain that perfect buoyancy while you're distracted with something else. So, you know, basic dive skills, practice basic dive skills until it's second nature.
Cool. So thanks for that. Guy Goodall's
And I
asking,
know
what are your
Thomas,
thoughts on accelerated
lots of practice
Deco
anyway.
80% when diving on a 32 minutes? Good.
What was the second part? When diving on a... okay.
Sorry. So what are your thoughts on accelerated Deco?
Yep. So accelerated Deco, I always query the word a little bit, because optimizing Deco might be a better word. But anyway, yeah, using a Deco gas, whatever it is, whether it's 50% or 80% or 100%, is a good thing. You're off-gassing faster. You're getting rid of that nitrogen faster. So from a decompression point of view, it's a great idea. And you know, I don't preach about any one particular Deco gas. I know there are some people who've got their favorites, and they wouldn't even speak to someone if they use a different Deco gas. I don't care which Deco gas I've got. If it's a question of using 80% or not diving, or using 100% or not diving, I'm diving. I'm using whatever gas is available. Yeah. Yeah, I would say use that Deco gas, accelerate the decompression. But, and this is where the previous question comes in, if you are using a Deco gas, and it doesn't matter which one, any Deco gas, you've got to be able to maintain the buoyancy on the stops, because Deco gas reduces your decompression, and that could potentially reduce your decompression risk, but you're introducing another risk with oxygen toxicity. So yeah, 80% is great as long as you've got the training, experience, knowledge, and skills to use it safely.
Great. Let's have a question from Marinos. How far away are we from eliminating the helium penalty from Deco software calculations?
That's a great question.
Question.
And a little bit of a background to those who don't understand the question. There's long been this feeling that going all the way back to Bullman got the sums wrong when it came to helium. And you know, we work on the basis that helium is a faster gas. It comes out faster, goes in faster, but comes out faster. And so some algorithms penalize you if you're using helium. So that's what we mean by the helium penalty. Through going back as far as 2000s, you know, 15, 20 years ago, divers were cheating their computers by lying to them about the amount of helium that went in there. Yeah. But we've sort of come back a little bit now, full circle, and effectively, I think the overall answer to that is that I think now the sort of Deco we're doing is probably about right. You know, we're not getting bent, we're not, but equally we're not staying in there a lot longer than we need to. So I think what will happen is when we do eliminate the helium penalty, then what will happen is we end up then having to make the decompression a little bit more conservative to take that into account. So basically, I think we've got the right answer, but for the wrong reason. So when we get the reasons right, we'll then have to fudge it to end up with the same answer that we're getting now. So from the end diver's point of view, I don't think you'll notice any difference if you're comparing two computers, one that's got a helium penalty and one that doesn't. You're probably going to end up with a similar amount of overall Deco. So it's a great question, and it's a real Deco nerd question. You know, I'm trying to really resist going into an hour-long discussion on this, but actually, in terms of the end diver, I don't think it's going to have a big impact.
And it's It's a question I've heard a lot in truck and bikini as well, and they've been asked to quite a fair few special guests, and the answer is pretty much always been similar to what you said. And when they ask, so what do you do? What do you type in your computer? People are hesitant, and then that's I find that's a good reason. There's nothing solid behind any results yet. It's the same thing when somebody asks me what gradient factors do you use. Something we'll get into a little bit later. But I also, there's one question I saw, and it was about the study that you just did while we're on that topic as well, from Mike. Was it done on open circuit or CCR?
Yeah, it's a good question. So when we originally put together the study, I was thinking open circuit. And the main reason for that was that there was another study done looking at ratio deco a couple of years ago, and I thought it would be really nice that they used all the same parameters as that study, and then we could compare not just our results, but we compare ours with those. But then when I put out the request for volunteers, people said, well, can I do it on a rebreather, because I dive a rebreather, dive open circuits, trimix to 55 meters anymore. And so basically everyone that is doing this in the UK, or the majority of people who are doing this sort of diving in the UK are doing it on a rebreather. So I thought, well, yeah, it makes a lot of sense to use this on a rebreather, because if that's the sort of diving we're doing, it's much more realistic. So in the end, I think I think everybody was on CCR for this project.
Great, thanks for that. Now, when we come back from the questions, guys, keep asking in the comment section, and we'll bring up a 5-10 minute slot where we do this again in a bit. But until then, let's talk a little bit more about the stuff you've been doing. So obviously, you did the Dan study. There's plenty of other stuff in your background. So what are your latest thoughts and impressions on the overall topic in the industry of decompression?
So my current thoughts are actually we're getting to the point where we're arguing about some fairly fine details. When you look at the two profiles that we looked at, 2085 and 5075, they're fairly significant differences between those in terms of the arguments that people would have. People would look at those, go, oh, that's crazy, I'm never going to dive that, or oh wow, that's that's such an extreme profile. And it's interesting, some people looked at those two profiles and said, oh wow, that one's really extreme, and other people said the other one is really extreme. So I think we pushed the two profiles to the two extremes, the two of what people are doing, and actually the results weren't that different. So I think the one lesson we can take away from this is, we're fine tuning. This isn't massive differences. You're not gonna get bent every single time you dive one of these profiles and never get bent if you dive the other. It's degrees of safety that we're talking about. So you will. I was looking at a thread on the internet today, going into all sorts of arguments, getting into such level of detail about these things. And in reality, I would dive either of those profiles. I did dive either of those profiles. We all dived each of those profiles to compare. So we're talking about making things a little bit safer. We're not talking about one thing that's dangerous and one thing that is safe. We're talking about trying to increase our level of safety. So one request to the industry as a whole is, when we're talking about these things, let's talk about them civilly. We're not talking about something where there are huge philosophical or political or religious differences. We're all trying to get to the same result. Yeah, we're talking about fine tuning some of the safety measures. So bear that in mind. Now, I think the deeper you go, the bigger the difference it makes. And on a recent trip, when I was diving the Britannic, we had people diving different gradient factors and having almost an hour difference in total run times. So when you get to 100, 122 meters or deeper, then that's when you start to get more and more differences. But if you're diving in the 40, 50, 60 meter range, it's a relatively small difference between the different profiles.
Unless you're in truck with me or in bikini or whatever, where we see some massive differences on 10-day trips, and people are doing 4-hour total run times for the whole day. I know what my gradient factors is, and I'm usually the one last out of the water every single day. But I'm there all the time, and that's the profile you use for a certain reason. And that's why when people ask me what is the gradient factor you use, I have learned to be hesitant in answering that question, because I don't want to give someone a piece of knowledge assuming that they won't look at it and how it applies to themselves, because I'm at a certain age, I have certain diving experience, I know how I feel after certain dives with certain gradient factors. So very much the gradient factor that I pick is based on me, not the person in front of me. So it is a question that is asked a lot on the boat, and I would never tell people what gradient factors to dive. Absolutely not. Are you still there, Mark?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and it comes to what I was saying before about why. Yeah, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think Jeff's missus needs to get off Netflix. Isn't that right, Jeff?
On the rural side of town where there's not so much good internet.
Yeah, Chepstow internet is failing at the moment. Anyway, sorry, Mark. What were you saying?
Just understanding about decompression theory. People need to understand this because this is what they're diving. And even if they use the default settings on their computer, that's still a decision. You're making the decision that you're going to use the default settings that have been picked by the dive computer manufacturer. So yeah, and if they pick the settings that you use, they're making a decision to follow you. So you can't get away from making a decision about what settings you use. If you've got a computer that uses gradient factors, you have to make a decision one way or the other about what you're going to dive.
And do you think some of the studies or arguments, discussions is relevant to the recreational market of divers too?
I think it becomes more important the more extreme the dive. So I used the example of depth as you go deeper. Your example about time is a great example. The longer the dive, the bigger the differences are going to make. The more repetitive diving, the bigger the differences are going to be. So when it comes to recreational diving, much less of an issue. Now, I'm still a big fan of using deep stops on even recreational dives. Now, if it's a recreational dive without a mandatory decompression stop, you don't need to do a deep stop. But I teach my students to do deep stops, not because just because of the decompression point of view, but from a control point of view.
Yeah.
If you are doing a safety stop at 5 meters and you go from 30 up to 5 and then make a little mistake and you miss that, you're on the surface. If you come up and you're stopping at 12 meters and then 9 meters and then 6 meters, then you've got 3 chances of getting it under control. And of course, the biggest pressure difference is close to the surface. So the more we slow it up in the last 10, 12 meters, the better. So I think the idea of deep stops is very, very applicable to recreational diving, but for a completely different reason.
So jumping a little bit forwards to gradient factors again, because it's something we touched on. I want to get a little bit more into it, because I'm sure people are curious about your thoughts. I'm not sure I'll ask you what gradient factor you use personally, but What gradient factors should we use? Are there some tips you can give people? I know there's not a lot of time here, but can you give people a little bit more insights in how you look at gradient factors?
I think if you look at the end results of a load of different profiles, one of the things that you notice is when you start to put in very deep stops, the time starts to go up because you're on gassing in the depth, and you've then got to off gas that later on. So when I'm planning a dive, I look for that sweet spot when you can keep putting in deeper stops until the time starts to tick up. And that's the point to me that says this stop is now causing more problems than it's worth. And depending on the profile, depending on a range of other things, around about the 30 for the low gradient factor is where it tends to kick in. So, personally, I think anything less than 30 as the low gradient factor, and you're causing more problems later on than you're solving. So anywhere in the sort of 30 to 60 range for the low gradient factor I would be perfectly happy diving. Yeah, personally, I use 50 at the moment. I'm considering using 60, but yeah, I'm happy with 50 at the moment. But I think the key thing is, though, is the high gradient factor. That is the simple one. The lower that number, the more conservative you are. If you're at 90 and you drop it down to 85, a little bit more time in the shallows, safer. Drop it a bit more down to 75, again, safer. Down to 70, again, safer again. And provided that you've got enough gas to do those shallow stops, then padding out your shallow stops is never a bad thing. You mentioned earlier you were often the last one out. When I am running trips, I'm usually the last one out, not because of my deco profile, but I just want to make sure everyone's out safely before I get out. So my deco might clear, but then I'll do another 10 minutes at 6 meters because, well, I may as well breathe my deco gas. What am I going to do on the boat other than wait on the back of the boat until the last person's out anyway? So I may as well wait in the water until everyone's out.
It's even in 2020, it's still a bit of a muddled area. Would you suggest any improvements to how this sort of knowledge is presented and communicated when being taught?
Yeah, I think that's one of the positives of this whole coronavirus thing. There's a lot of stuff we want to go back to. We want to go back to getting in the water. We want to go back to be able to go out. But I think things like this, using video conferencing to get this information out is something that we shouldn't go back to, and we should maintain this. We should keep on doing this, and I'm planning on putting together a number of talks and to get some of this information out, because I'm constantly amazed that there is such a thirst for this knowledge, and we sometimes as instructors assume that people know all of this stuff. Well, lots of divers don't. Lots of instructors maybe are a little bit rusty or have never been involved in this sort of area. So I think getting more information out through these sorts of channels is something that we're not going to go away from. We want to keep on doing this well into the future.
So I wanted to ask a question that's probably burning on some people's minds. You've all written 2 books now. Is there a new book on the way?
When I wrote the first one, I thought, that's it. I'm never doing that again. That's a really stupid idea. And then after a couple of years, I thought, well, maybe it wouldn't be such a... I've got an idea for a book. So that's where the technical diving came out. The other reason, again, is that I saw a need for it. With the technical diving world, I go back to Kevin Gur's book all the time. It's a great book.
It's a really good book.
But some of the techniques have moved on. It's not an entry-level book. And then also, Rob Palmer's book was what got me into technical diving So that's a classic. But again, that's it's got a lot of dated information in there now. So a lot of stuff is still very relevant, but things have moved on. And then Jared Jablonski's book is fantastic, but it's very, very GUE specific and one specific way of diving. And so for somebody coming into technical diving, a recreational diver coming into technical diving and wanting to know, well, why do they do it like that? Why do they use that set of equipment? What are the differences? There isn't a really good introduction. So I saw that there was a need for it. So I think if I was going to write another book, it would have to be something I'm passionate about, but also something that I can see a need for. And two ideas I've got bouncing around in my head is one, something on buoyancy. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about buoyancy at all levels, recreational and technical. And then also teaching. I think there's a lot of things that we could do to improve the overall level of teaching across the industry. Teaching diving is not just about presenting a set of agency materials. We have to actually teach. We have to look at what our students are doing, look at the problems that they're having, and work out how to best teach that information. So that's one of my passions. I love diving, but I love teaching as well. And so putting the two together would be something I'd be interested in. But I have to wait until I've got some time on my hands.
Sure. I mean, we were in Germany and together at Boot in February, and I remember we were talking about a book as well.
There's that one as well.
Yeah, there's a lot on the back burner we can work on right now. So if you were to give me a couple of idols, let's say, the people you had on your poster as a teenager instead of girls in bikini, who would that be?
So I think there are a couple of people from the general diving point of view. I've already mentioned one, Rob Palmer, who many younger divers now may not know, but Rob was one of the founder members of TDI. He was TDI instructor number 007.
Oh, no way! Excellent.
They skipped 006, so he could have 007. And one of the founding lights of TDI. But then also, and unfortunately, all of these guys have got one thing in common: that they're no longer with us. When it comes to decompression theory, then Bill Hamilton was really one of the first researchers to take information and give it to divers. He could see that they were going to go and do this stuff anyway, so we may as well try and help them and try and make it as safe as possible. And Bruce Weinke, who died fairly recently,
rest in peace.
Even though we've moved away from bubble models a lot, was instrumental in some of the early the bubble model theories. And then very recently, Dick Van passed away just last week. And Dick really, I think, was the person who probably knew more about decompression theory than anyone. If you look in the references in Deco for Divers, you read any decompression paper, and Dick Van's name is there over and over again. He really was one of the giants of decompression research, and also such a nice and such an interesting guy as well. Former Navy SEAL, Navy SEAL decompression researcher. I met Dick for the first time in Rebreather Forum 3, 2013, I think, and was blown away by just what a nice, humble guy. Was more than happy to talk for hours about decompression. Such a nice, helpful guy, and a huge loss to the diving community.
Absolutely. So moving on from the idols. Well, we're actually coming close on the time, but I think it's okay if we run a bit over. There's so many questions in the live feed, and people are very interested in hearing your thoughts. What are your thoughts on the dive computer market?
I think the dive computer market, it's really interesting. I mean, as we said earlier, SDI was the first to insist that divers use dive computers because used correctly, a dive computer is a fantastic tool. It makes things easier. And it goes through cycles. You know, I remember when Uatech, the Aladdin Pro was the go-to computer, and we've moved on. Sunto dominated the market for technical diving. Now there's really, the Shearwater is absolutely dominating, for good reason. Fantastic computer, so easy, and the guys at Shearwater in particular, Bruce and Lynn are so dedicated to the diving market
products.
and really want to support the industry. So I think they are they're head and shoulders above the competition at the moment, which I think is a good thing, because set a high bar, and then the other manufacturers have got something to aim for. If someone is coming out with a competitor to the Shearwater, then it's got to be good. They've got to everybody's got to raise their game. So I think we're there's a lot of really good, interesting computers out there at the moment.
Competition is the best way of innovation, right? I mean, when Shearwater came out with a Terric, my missus is in competitive freediving, and we had one of these, and she started taking it on the World Championship circuit, and all the freedivers started asking questions because it had quite some advanced freediving modes in it that they hadn't seen anywhere else, Sunto and the rest of it. And this is, for me, a good sign because it makes the other guys crack on. There's definitely competition and there's innovation in the market, and that's what we need.
Absolutely. Yeah. Competition's a good thing. Yep.
Absolutely. So we're going to go back to the audience questions in a few minutes, but we'll do a bit of a in other news segment before we go there. So Mark, you've been in truck with me twice. Can you tell me about a diving experience that was especially memorable to you, since you're such a wreck junkie?
Well, I think truck was. I've said this before. I had to do truck because I don't think you can really call yourself a wreck diver unless you've been to truck. So I had huge expectations of truck, and they were surpassed. It's just a fantastic wreck diving location. So I love engine rooms, and it is such a fantastic place for engine rooms. But I think my one real take-home memory, it's not the famous wrecks. It's not the San Francisco Maru, but I think it was the Fujisan on the last day. And you were there, and yes,
Jeff was there as well.
So was Jeff. Yeah, and we just went and had fun, and we seemed to spend about 4 hours in that engine room and still not see everything.
There was a lot of laughter on that time.
There was a lot of it coming from me at the end, because I seem to remember when we went in, there was this nice big hole that we swam in nice and easily, and then when we came out, I swam out of this nice big hole. I turned around, and I was really curious why you guys were trying to swim out this little tiny hole.
Hilarious. It's called streamlining, right? No problem.
Yeah, well, see, I take it easy. I got the big hole, and then don't worry about streamlining.
It's a very sideways wreck, as you see in these images. So it's quite a confusing engine room.
It was an excellent engine room nonetheless. What was this backup story? This keeps coming in the comments section. What's this all about?
Yeah, so that was that's a memory that keeps me smiling.
What's that?
Well, Matt's already talked about you getting lost on our up again, but this is from the second trip, and on the first trip, Jesper was my roommate, and there you go. He's there. Great roommate, considerate, tidy, really nice guy, absolutely fantastic. And then on the second trip, Aron said, right? You're sharing with me this time. Yeah. we got into the cabin, and Aron took all his equipment, just threw it up in the air, and then wherever it landed, that's where it lived for the next 10 days.
Yeah, it was raining CCR parts everywhere. I was sleeping on my service kit, I remember.
Every
Sorry
single
about that.
square inch was covered in spare parts. I don't know how you spread it out.
And it was pretty amazing because, you know, I'd wake up and you would have your, you know, your bed tidied up, you'd have the toothbrush, and then it was like military. And it was quite funny walking in and seeing half of the room like this and half of the room like Operation Crossroads.
It wasn't half the room. There was my bed, and then there was the rest of the room.
Yeah, fair enough. Anyway, we're gonna go on our third adventure soon enough in Bikini in 2021. I think it's August 17 to August 28. Hopefully, when this is all over, right? So remember, guys, you can always send us an email, and if you want any more information to join me and Mark in Bikini. But enough about that. Let's move into a few more personal questions before we get into questions from the community. How was the Britannic? Can you tell me a little bit about that as a wreck dive? It's not something I've had the chance to do yet, I have to be honest.
The Britannic was absolutely fantastic. The Britannic was one of my bucket list wrecks. In fact, I think, you know, the Britannic, truck, and Bikini are probably the bucket list of almost every diver. And you know, the Britannic, sister ship of the Titanic, absolutely fantastic wreck, and the history behind it, the difficulty getting to it, and then the you know, the wreck itself, just an incredible experience. And also the divers that I did it with, same as you know, the Dirty Dozen trips, it's the group that you go with that makes it so memorable. And we were so lucky that trip, we had such a good team on that Britannic trip. So yeah, it's that will stay with me for many years to come.
It seems like your video has gone offline, but that's okay. We still have your audio. What about the HMS Hermes? Do you have any plans to return?
Hopefully, yeah. I was hoping to get back and do the Hermes again this year, although I don't think that's going to happen now. But yeah, definitely want to get back out and dive that again. We you know, we dived that just after the civil war had finished in Sri Lanka, and it's a very historic wreck. The Hermes was the first ship that was specifically commissioned as an aircraft carrier, and so incredibly significant. There's very few aircraft carriers that are diveable. Saratoga and Bikini is another one.
Yeah, we're gonna have a good time.
But the Hermes was the first, so you know, you can't get much more significant than the first. So yeah, that is that's another target to get back out to as soon as things open up again.
So just the last one before we go to our Facebook community. What Scuba Educators FB group? I've seen this pop up. You invited me to the group for the instructors here in watching. What's it all about? So
coming back to the comment I was saying before about, you know, teaching, one of my passions is teaching and improving teaching quality, and there's a lot of information that is available, not specifically about scuba education, but just teaching techniques in general, and there's plenty of places where you can go and talk about safety or decompression theory or equipment or rebreathers, but there's nowhere for instructors who are really interested in improving their educational techniques to go. No central resource. So I decided to set up the group as a way for you know, like-minded instructors, progressive instructors, to share information and develop best practices for teaching. So it's a way of sharing information between the instructor community, basically.
Excellent. All right. Since you don't have your video on right now, I'll ask a few questions since we still have the audio from the community, and then we can start wrapping this interview up. So first of all, what are your thoughts on age versus technical diving? Mike Cunningham, hey Mike, is asking.
That's a really interesting question. I mean, you look at the statistics, and in the UK, the BSAC statistics say that your risk of being a diving fatality goes up after 50. Most of the diving fatalities are after 50. So, on first glance, that looks like, well, easy. Stop everyone over 50 diving, and we get rid of a load of the incidents. But it's like most statistics, you've got to be really careful about how you interpret that. If you look at that another way, it says, people over 50 are more likely to die than people under 50. Well, that's not news. Old people tend to die more often than younger people. In fact, if you look at it, over 50-year-olds who dive are less likely to have a fatality than over 50-year-olds that don't die. So if you're over 50, you should start diving because it will reduce your overall risk.
Good point.
So I think age itself is not the key factor. It's how well you have aged. If you're fit, if you stay fit, stay healthy, you've got no underlying medical conditions, you're exercising regularly, you've got good lung function abilities, then why shouldn't people carry on diving as they get older?
Exactly. And there's a good kind of follow-up question to this topic from Ed Smith. And it's saying, what personal factors do you use to determine a change in your gradient factors? And would you change them based on the profile you'll be doing, the dive environment, and other planned dives, like 10 days in truck?
So I tend to stick pretty much to the same set of gradient factors. I know some people use different gradient factors at different depths. I tend to stick to the same steps. The only difference when in truck, I did bump my my high gradient factor down a little bit. Multiple deep decompression dives over a number of days. When you're in the middle of the Pacific, let's put in as much conservatism as we can in there. Plus, the other consideration, we were in warm water. We were in dry suits, not to stay warm, but for protection. So cold was not an issue. We could have stayed in there for another 3 or 4 hours without any cold problem. So why not spend as much time as possible in the water?
Exactly.
It's I tend to keep mine pretty consistent. I'd rarely go more aggressive. I would occasionally go a little bit more conservative. Although what I do sometimes do is keep my backup on a different set of settings. I think you do the same, Aron.
Yeah, backup is on 90-90.
Yeah, exactly. So I've got a get out of jail option.
Yeah. Shit hits the fan card.
Exactly. And 90-90 is not even as aggressive as Bullman, which is what we were all diving in late 90s, 2000. So it's not as if that is dangerous. It's just shaving off a little bit of the safety margin. Yeah. So worst case, if it all hits the fan, I've got something I can get out as quickly as possible, and still be pretty confident that I'm not going to get bent.
And the thing is, we can sit and talk about this for hours now, but I'm sure people have other webcasts or to do or dinner or whatever. So I'm going to take one more question, and then we're going to wrap this up. And it's quite a good one. Should the industry be providing Deco services, i.e. computers and the others, that tailor algorithms to accommodate personal and environmental factors?
Wow, that's a huge can of worms.
Exactly.
What would those personal environmental factors be? We'd have to have a complete theory as to what personal factors affected Deco and to how much. In 50 years' time, yes, absolutely, it'll be reading your personal bio.
We'll have a robot inside our bloodstream,
Exactly, yeah. But right now, if we did have one that we could tailor, we wouldn't be entirely sure what we could tailor that to. The other thing as well is that people tend to pick a computer based on the end result. So some computers have a reputation for being conservative, and people think that's a bad thing. It keeps me in the water longer. So if we did have an algorithm that tailored it to personal environmental factors, you'd probably have people cheating it and saying that they're 21 and optimum height and weight. So
21 forever.
I'm not sure that's practical right now.
No, exactly.
So
some top tips for our audience at the very end. Hopefully, when all this COVID crisis is over as soon as possible, when it's safe for us to return and resume our normal activities, how do you think is the best way for the viewers to return to the water safely after this is over?
Build up back to where you were. This is something we see every year for people who don't dive over winter, say, and then they jump back in. That's when people are rusty. This, I think, apart from when I had my appendix out, this will be the longest I've been out of the water for I can't remember how long. So I'm just going to jump in, nice shallow dive, and just make sure I remember how everything works before going and doing another 100-meter dive. So yeah, just take it slowly and be sensible.
Excellent. So I think that kind of wraps it up for us on this episode of Coming Clean with the Dirty Dozen with Mark Powell. So Mark, I can't see your face, but I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank you so much for coming. You're a dear friend. It's always nice to see you and talk to you and share ideas. And I look forward to our adventure in bikini in August 2021.
I can't wait. I am really looking forward to it. And great to talk to you.
All right. I'll see you later, brother. Bye-bye. Okay, everyone. So that was our episode with Mark Powell wrapping up. Thank you so much for tuning in. I want to take the opportunity and let you know that we have a YouTube channel. So if you go on YouTube and write The Dirty Dozen Expeditions, our channel comes up. And all these videos, so our first episode with Jill Heinerth about her being bent, the second episode with Matt Jevon about his recovery from COVID-19, and this episode will be there, or the first two are already there, and this one will be online very shortly should you have missed it. So remember, when you're on the channel, to click the subscribe button to get notifications and click the little bell thingy like all the YouTubers say. So without any further ado, I want to thank you for joining us for this episode of Coming Clean with the Dirty Dozen. Join us on Thursday, where we interview Jim Standing and Paul Strike from Fourth Element about the way the hammer shapes the hand, how dives create products. And it's going to be Monday, the 27th of April, 7 p.m. GMT, 8 p.m. London, 3 p.m. New York. I'm your host, Aron Arngrimsson. I'd like to say stay safe in these wild times. Take care of yourself and each other. And if you feel lonely, we're here to chat dirty. See you later, guys.